Good morning, everybody. It's so good to be with you. Although there is no substitution for being in person, of course. And especially for Dharma talks, I like to be in the in the same space as people because we we feed off of each other's energy, and it's harder to read that energy from a distance. However, um, still we can read each other's energy. It's just a little bit more challenging, that's all. And most of you have been sitting since Friday afternoon, so many kudos to you. This process of emptying, emptying our hearts, emptying our minds, not in a non-critical way, but as a way to purify so that we can see reality as it is, as opposed to the delusive ways in which we often see reality. So, I have offered a talk in the past on a treatise called The Awakening of Faith, and it's attributed to Ashvaghosha. This is a book I actually found at Nebraska Zen Center in the library there, so I've been borrowing it and reading through it slowly. And so this is actually the second talk on Ashvaghosha's The Awakening of Faith. And I'd like to hone in on a particular aspect of it that centers on the idea of faith. It might be helpful first to state what faith is not when we're talking about Zen Buddhism and we're talking about Buddhism, from my understanding, as a whole. But specifically, I'm speaking from the Zen Buddhist tradition on this idea of faith. So, my understanding is that faith is not a blind faith. It's not a blind faith. We don't just put our trust into something that we can't see or observe. But when I say something that we can't see or observe, there are things that are very subtle to our sense perceptions. And unless we're cultivating a concentrated mind and a soft mind, those aspects of reality will remain hidden to us. So from that perspective, if we cannot perceive these subtle aspects of reality, but we can know that they're there based on what somebody has said, then perhaps we can say we have blind faith. But again, it's a faith grounded in uh, in reality, a faith that can of something that can potentially be perceived when the mind is subtle enough, or when the mind is refined enough to be able to perceive this aspect of reality. Faith is not synonymous with what we believe. So we often in the West, we talk about faith and belief synonymously. And I don't think that that is the case here. I'm not opposed to various beliefs or belief systems. I just caution us from associating that word faith with belief in a Zen context. As an aside, I do want to share that Soto Zen is not a it's not a a new age spirituality. It's actually a denomination that's been around for over 1,000 years. I mean, we can trace our roots back to Japan, and I have a connection with the Soto school in Japan, and Soto Zen is considered a denomination of many denominations within Buddhism. And in North America here, we are in the process of formally making Soto Zen a recognized denomination. So it's not a fringe. There are other spirituality groups that practice meditation, and I'm sure there's good stuff in those. And with any religious institution, you're going to have good and bad. So just recognizing that is, I think, a first step towards wholeness and health, a healthy organization. There's going to be good and bad. There's no perfect in regards to any religious organization or denomination. But there is some weight to what we offer in terms of practice. And I think that word denomination connotes a kind of weight behind us. We come from a lineage of various teachers. Here at with Nebraska Zen Center, there's the Katagiri lineage. But if you take it back to his teacher and you go back to Japan, these lineages are less important. They're all coming back to Zen Master Keizan and Zen Master Dogen in the 13th century. So that's really the primary thing about lineage. And from a spiritual angle, lineage is much bigger than any one human line is. It includes the lineages of all species. It's what we come from in the widest sense. In the widest sense. So faith in Zen is compatible with science. I just want to say that faith, not in some kind of a quirky way, but as I share this treatise, uh, you might find ways in which faith is actually compatible with science. What we do that might be different from, say, a scientific way of observing so science in general is a way of observing the world. It's also, there's also medicine, the way of observing the physical body. There's also psychology, the way of observing the mind. And our context for Zen, our context is we're turning the lens of our mind to look at our condition of suffering. That's the context in which we're working within. There's a lot of other contexts that you can employ the concept of faith in, but this, I think, just to clarify, we're turning our mental lens, our attention towards the ways in which we suffer, both this body and mind, as well as the ways in which that we suffer in our world, in our environment. Furthermore, faith is not, it's the way that we understand faith is that we don't place more interest in leaving this world behind than in illuminating this world. I think this is an important point. I just want to restate it. Faith, it's not that we are doing this practice in order to get to another world. This is a very important distinction I want to make between ourselves, between what Zen puts out there, and maybe some other more mainstream religions in the United States. We're not doing this practice in order to get to another world, but rather we're doing it in order to illuminate this world, to illuminate what's in this world. Again, it has to do with the subtlety, right? What are we missing? There's something very subtle, and Zazen is there to help us to refine our perception so that we can become sensitized and sensitive to this subtlety, right? So another way to say it is that faith is not based in our faith is not based in a fear of the afterlife, that there's something waiting for us in the future that's dependent on what we're doing right now, in terms of, are we being good enough? You know, are we doing the right formula? That's not the faith that we're concerned about. All right. So this treatise, the treatise on the awakening faith, is it's primarily philosophical and not religious. It lacks a lot of the religious symbols that you would associate with a religious text. For example, the Lotus Sutra, which we chanted this morning. We chanted the Universal Gateway chapter of the Lotus Sutra, invoking Avalokiteshvara. We recited the Lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which focused on the Buddha Shakyamuni and his actually the lifespan of the Buddha. So in any case, it's not fantastical. And so in that sense, I think it speaks to a lot of us that come into the modern scientific world. It's primarily philosophical, and it refines the way that we perceive, or it helps to guide the mind in refining the way we perceive ourselves and reality. And this treatise on the awakening faith is, maybe this is too simplistic. I'm not a scholar on this, and I think you could potentially look at this. We could potentially look at this very, very deeply over a long period of time, this particular treatise. It's not very long, but it's packed full of stuff. But from what I've gathered so far and my minimal understanding of it, it's the focus of stopping, the practice of stopping, the practice of seeing, the practice of acting. In a nutshell, stopping, seeing, acting. Or you could say, rather than acting, maybe you could say doing. Stopping and doing are the two opposites, right? And then there's seeing. And the way we might relate or connect this to our practice is that when we're sitting, when we're doing zazen, we're stopping. We're calming the mind down. We're calming the body down. We're slowing down. And when you're doing Sesshin, you're not only calming the body and the mind down, you're also slowing down your external activities in a pretty profound way. Because if you think about all of the things that you had to do in order just to come to Sesshin, right? All the things that had to happen for you in order for, and the things that you're not doing as a result, that so that you could do this particular practice. So stopping, seeing, and seeing here from my limited view of this treatise, seeing has to do with becoming perceptive to what's called suchness or thusness. And I'll say more about that here. But getting tuned in to be able to see suchness, and then acting or doing, that's the third piece, has to do with development of compassion and acting in the world from a place of compassion. So in a sense, you have here these two wings of Buddhism, the two wings of the bird of wisdom on the one hand and compassion on the other. The wisdom of seeing suchness, the compassion of acting in the world. So again, I'm not talking about this whole treatise. I'm just going to hone in on one small section here because I think it's too much to do in one Dharma talk. In one section, the author Ashvaghosha, he talks about faith in four things. He talks the first one, faith in the absolute, faith in the Buddha, faith in the Dharma, faith in the Sangha. So those last three are pretty common for every Buddhist school. We we say maybe a more palatable word for many people that are coming into Buddhism for the first time or leaving Western-based religions rather than faith is taking refuge in the Buddha, taking refuge in the Dharma, taking refuge in the Sangha. But you could also, if you feel so inclined, substitute that word faith, to have faith in the Buddha, faith in the Dharma, faith in the Sangha. Because when we're talking about the Dharma, we're talking about the things that are just, we're talking about the truth. What is truth? I mean, we can look at truth from so many angles. And on Thursday, I was sharing with the group that truth can be found in food. I was cooking up asparagus the other day, and I broke the asparagus tip, and I had this like just a sudden insight into that. Oh, this is truth. This is just this. And Dogen, he himself, he says, the Dharma is food. Food is the Dharma. I mean, this is one way of talking about the Dharma. But another way is saying, my nose is vertical and my eyes are horizontal. That's Dharma. That's truth. Or like how my teacher introduced this to me a long, long, long time ago when I was first a student of hers and a very early student of Buddhism. She said, you can't bribe water not to freeze at 32. You can't bribe it. You can't give it something. That's Dharma, right? That's Dharma. And then you've got the Buddha. So we place our faith in Dharma. We place our faith in the Buddha, somebody who recognizes Dharma. It's not. It can be a historical figure. We have that historical person, but that's not. It's not limited to a historical person. And from our school's perspective, there is a strong sense that the Buddha was a human being. And yet in the sutras, we see a more than human being as well. So however you want to take that, we don't have to get caught up in the details of that right at this moment. And then faith in each other, right? Faith in the Sangha is we take refuge in each other. But what I want to focus is on the first one it mentioned, and that is faith in the absolute dimension. So let's look at what does that mean? What does that mean? And this treatise, it talks about the absolute as synonymous with Mahayana. So Mahayana here is not referring to Mahayana versus Hinayana, which is somewhat of a pejorative term anyways, or Theravada. It's not referring to it, Mahayana, in that way. For those of you familiar with this term, Mahayana, Zen Buddhism is said to be part of the Mahayana tradition, along with Chinese Buddhism, Chan, and Tendai, and other forms of Buddhism that come out of China, Korea, Japan. It's not referring to this branch of Buddhism. Rather, it's referring to the absolute. Right? When the author speaks of the Mahayana, he's actually referring not to a branch of Buddhism. He's talking about this absolute dimension. Another way of talking about it is suchness, or you may have heard the term thusness, or tathata. The Tathagata is an epithet for Buddha or the Buddha. Tathagata means the thus come one. I find this concept very alluring, the thus come one, the one that comes from thusness, the one that comes from suchness. It's referring to the Buddha. But if you're really, and this is what we are putting our faith in, if you're really, really perceptive, if you hone your skills of perception, you can see that you also come from thusness. You are Tathagata. You are the thus come one. When you perceive that thusness, that of which you are just the face of at this moment, we are like the faces, we're the external appearance of thusness. Thusness is the entire universe, right? We are the particularity of that in this moment. Another word is one mind, one mind. So thusness, one mind, suchness, the absolute. So the absolute, to clarify, what are we talking about? The absolute is one dimension. It's one aspect of the mind. And again, mind isn't just this thing here. Like my teacher would say, she'd point to the this part just above the eyes, right? It's not just it's the absolute is referring to one dimension of mind. And if we flip the coin, there is the phenomenal world. That's the other dimension. That's the other side. So there's the absolute on one side, and there's the phenomenal world. The phenomenal world is referring to the world that we usually spend most of our time in, the world of differences, the world of agreements and disagreements, the world of suffering, the world of loss, samsara. So the absolute and the relative. These are so rather than the absolute dimension being something that's far removed from our present experience, it's actually in our midst right here, right now. We just often don't have the subtlety of mind to perceive it in our activity. So, in a sense, Sesshin and even just short periods of Zazen are there to help us get in touch with that aspect of reality. Again, not something that's far removed from our present experience. So, one way to say this is that these two aspects, the absolute and the phenomenal, or the absolute and the relative, they are mutually inclusive. They're mutually inclusive, not mutually exclusive. They include each other. You can't separate them out, right? We're, in a sense, embedded in suffering and suchness simultaneously. Right? So it's not an escape. We're not escaping from the suffering. It's not a narrative where we're trying to get out of this suffering. Because if you get out of the suffering, you're also leaving the thusness behind. You can't. They're two inseparable things. So oh, can you feel that in your body? Like maybe, for many of us, we come because we want to escape suffering in some way, if we're totally honest. But I mean, can you feel like, how does that feel? It's really meant to be we need to embody this what's called the two truths. We need to feel it in our body. There is, and it's almost it feels like maybe even contradictory, or maybe you feel some tension in the center of the body around this. That's not a bad thing, but we're educated, I think, to wanna resolve things, to wanna resolve duality, to wanna resolve dualistic or non-duality rather. We want to resolve non-duality, and Zen is in a really good spot to help us not do that. That, in a sense, is going to get us more deeply in touch with this absolute dimension of reality that's, again, right here, right now. The two existing simultaneously together. But so why, maybe the question might arise is, at least it did for me, like, well, why bother with this practice if it doesn't take us to, like, in a linear way from A to B? If it doesn't take us from A to B, why bother with it? There are things out there that we could potentially do that transport us in a sense. And my response to that is that we are transforming this suffering into enlightenment. And without our touching of the suffering, we cannot grow the blossom of enlightenment. So without the touching of the suffering, we need to stay immersed in it, because in a sense that suffering is the fuel for our healing, for our health, overall physical, mental, and spiritual health. It's the fuel for it. So we're not going to another place through this. We're actually transforming what's here. Um, Maybe another way to see this is that we do this, again, the question, and when we're sitting in Sesshin, this question may have come up for you, like, why am I here? Did I make a mistake? Right? I could have been doing so many other things right now. Did I make a mistake? So to develop our ability, this has to do with the subtlety, but to develop our ability to see the wonder of existence, right? That we can anticipate that. We can anticipate that in our practice, the development of the ability to see the wondrous, what in Zen terms, the wondrous Dharma, the marvelous Dharma. Or you could, in non-Zen terms, you could say the wonder of being alive. The fact that we are breathing in and breathing out. I mean, this is so precious, right? To inhale, to exhale. And we can't see that in our ordinary, generally, in our ordinary waking thinking, without really, coming with a meditative, a contemplative, a prayerful attitude. Then we start to experience, oh yeah, yeah. And again, it doesn't have to be for long periods. Sesshin is a special privilege that we really set aside this time. It's very precious that we really set aside this time to touch the wonder of existence. We do it in part to end our anxiety, about death, right? Because if we really understand that we are thus come, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. And if there's nowhere to go, that's the relief of anxiety. That's the release of our anxiety, kind of the existential anxiety of that comes with being born. So we're born out of thusness, we return to thusness. And again, maybe the most important thing here is to develop compassion for this suffering world, to develop compassion. Because if we're just in it to see thusness, to see this amazingness, to see this emptiness of reality, that's only one wing of the bird, right? The bird can't fly with one wing. You gotta have the two wings flying to let the bird fly. And the second wing is the compassionate element, to do good, to actively do good. And that includes how we think about everybody, nobody excluded there. And it also has to do with our ability, compassion arises in us from our ability to touch suffering of this world, the samsara of this world. And I don't know about you, but boy, the samsara, that's part of the reason why I decided to be a priest, is because I kept touching samsara, not as a Buddhist, but as a human being. I kept touching samsara wherever I went. It was just like, oh my God, how do I deal with this? How do I work with this? I wasn't interested anymore in escaping from it because it wasn't going away. I could easily delude myself. I could easily delude myself that, oh, I've overcome suffering. But it keeps entering. It keeps it's the waters that we swim in. And just a recent example that touched me really deeply when I was reading the news and learned about pretty much the complete dismantling of the Environmental Protection Agency. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's not a surprise. It didn't come as a surprise. It didn't come so much as a shock, but I could feel a sense of loss, difficulty, pain, and it threw me. It did throw me for a little bit, and it's still there. And I'm glad that I touched that pain because it connects to how we understand and how we see ourselves in relationship to other species, to the planet itself. And again, if this practice is about the development of compassion, then there's no escape from focusing on the suffering that we're experiencing in this world. It's not just a suffering that's a philosophical type of suffering that we have to figure out. It's real suffering of this world, of others, of other humans, also of other species, the planet itself, right? There's intense suffering. So, along with this dismantling of environmental protection laws comes with the realization of the profound level of greed, the profound greed that fuels this kind of action, the profound level of delusion that we don't see our connection to that which gives life. And that's why faith is not blind. We can see our breath is a result of the multiple systems, right? The fire from the sun, the water from the earth itself, the ground which grows us our food. This is not a blind faith. It's seeing that this life, this wonder, this wondrous Dharma, this wondrous truth that we're swimming in, uh, is indebted to the life systems. And so the Buddha said, be watchful of greed, be watchful of hatred, because those are the result of a delusive mind, a delusive way of thinking, a way of thinking that separates, that causes us versus them kind of thinking. So even those that we hate, right? Those are the ones we've got to love. We've absolutely, we've got to send out our positive thoughts to the ones that are destroying this planet. That includes ourselves in a sense, right? To put our love out there. That's what we can do on a mental level. A lack of empathy. That's another aspect of our society in particular. There are certain political leaders that have said it explicitly that I can't remember the specific term, but um, the word like that we have too much empathy. In other words, empathy is not a good thing. Coming from our national leaders, that is a delusive way of thinking. No consideration for future generations. I want to share some verses from the Avatamsaka Sutra on the formation of worlds. I've been sharing this in the morning during Zazen. All lands are born. This is from the Formation of Worlds chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra. All lands are born according to the power of actions. See, this is such a different way of thinking than I grew up, and maybe the way you grew up as well, where this creation story, the creation starts from a beginning point. Or even if you don't buy into a creation point, we have this linear sense of progression. And Buddhism takes it all into the present moment. As my teacher would say, the Big Bang is still happening. It's not something that happened 14 billion years ago only. It's still present. And so the way the Avatamsaka Sutra expresses this is all lands are born according to the power of actions. I mean, this is so empowering. This is so potentially empowering. Every action gives rise to the world. Every action that we do, individually and collectively, gives rise to the world that we see around us. You all should observe the forms of changes as they are. Here's another one. Here's the next verse. Defiled sentient beings are bound. Defiled sentient beings are bound by habitual confusions to be feared. Their minds cause oceans of worlds to all become defiled. If your mind is defiled, you create defilement in the world. There's a direct link there. This is not blind faith. This is a direct seeing. If any have pure hearts and cultivate virtuous deeds, their minds will cause oceans of worlds to have purity mixed with defilement. Right? And then the next one. When infinite, this is a beautiful verse. I think you're going to love this. When infinite sentient beings, this is our practice. This is really our practice. This gets to it. And this is what I want to really emphasize, that we start cultivating, especially in Sesshin. I mean, we're not doing anything. We're just sitting there for hour after hour. So really cultivate this, what's called Hotsubo Daishin. Here's how the sutra says it. When infinite sentient beings determine on enlightenment, their minds will cause world oceans to be pure for that age. Right? That's the key, to determine on enlightenment. I mean, I don't care if you're a Buddhist or not. And I'm not saying that we have to make everybody Buddhist here. That's not what this is about at all. There is something in the human psyche that desires for what in Buddhism we call enlightenment. Maybe you can come up with a different word for it that is more appealing, or is more what we call skillful means. But all of us, we desire something more, right? Otherwise, why would we be here? But we cultivate this desire for enlightenment. This is the heart of Soto Zen practice is the desire for enlightenment. And it's not an enlightenment that's far off, but to build resolve for it is essential. That resolve, that you could call it desire, but I like the word resolve. Like, I want this. I really, really want this. We all have desire. And so this is channeling desire towards enlightenment. And it's not somebody else's enlightenment. It's not somebody else out there's enlightenment. It's your enlightenment, what that looks like for your life. And hopefully, I mean, given that we work in multiple arenas, multiple circles with different kinds of people, it will positively influence whoever you're working with, whether they're Buddhist or not. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is that here we're doing this practice to cultivate that resolve, that desire for enlightenment. Right? Okay, so getting back to the awakening of faith, it mentions this explicitly as well on this cultivation of enlightenment, or the desire for it. Let me read a little bit. All bodhisattvas aspire to the enlightenment realized by all the Buddhas, disciplining themselves to this end and advancing toward it. That's it. This is coming straight from the awakening of faith, right? All bodhisattvas, that's you and me, right? All bodhisattvas aspire to the enlightenment realized by all the Buddhas, disciplining. That's what we're doing. We're disciplining ourselves in Sesshin, disciplining themselves to this end and advancing toward it. Briefly, 3 types of aspiration for enlightenment can be distinguished. Okay, so now we're getting into more subtle things here. The first is the aspiration for enlightenment through the perfection of faith. All right. So by perfecting this faith, we increase our desire for enlightenment. That's key. That's so interesting. It's, we're not just left hanging. Okay, I want to get my desire for enlightenment more. Well, how do you do that then? Well, focusing on faith. And then it mentions two others. The second is the aspiration for enlightenment through understanding and through deeds, right? Through understanding and through deeds, through activity. The third is the aspiration for enlightenment through insight. So I want to focus on the first and this one. I mean, it goes into detail on those other two as well, but I want to just focus on that first one, the aspiration for enlightenment through the perfection of faith. Right? So the question that is raised here, um, by whom and through what kind of discipline can faith be perfected so that the aspiration for enlightenment may be developed? So by whom and what kind of discipline? So let's break that down. So who? That's number one. Um, who can do this? Those of excellent capacity for goodness. Excellent capacity for goodness. That's you guys, right? That's each of you. You have capacity for goodness. Who is it? Who does it? Those that believe in karma, those that understand cause and effect. Interestingly, yesterday I took my daughter Pema to the library and we walked. There was snow all around us. It's just beautiful out, isn't it? To see the snow, the white, precious snow. We don't, this snow, it doesn't come as much as it used to. Every time we have a snowfall, we should really look at the wonder of that because we don't know how much longer we're going to be seeing snow. And I don't mean to spread fear. I'm just saying the reality of the world that we live in. We don't know how much more snow we're going to get. Will it continue in our lifetime? Future generations? For generations upon generations, snow has covered this planet, especially the northern hemisphere, right? Or the two poles. This is not the case right now. Uh, in any case, I was walking to the library and thinking about that. This snow is very precious. And my daughter, she doesn't understand cause and effect. She doesn't understand karma. And but she delighted in seeing this snow. And I could imagine, looking at it through her eyes, the brightness and the light bouncing off into her retina and her experience, the physiological interactions that are taking place in her body and mind and experiencing that light and the way that light reflects. And what does she want to do? Well, she wants to do what every one of us wants to do when we experience that. You want more of it. You want to touch it. You want to grasp it, right? So she had her gloves on. She takes her gloves off. She's putting her hands in the snow and picking it up and she's squeezing it and dropping it and that kind of thing. And a couple minutes after doing these things, she realizes her hands are freezing cold. She realizes her hands are freezing cold, and she starts to really complain. She starts to cry. I'm like, yeah, that's what happens when you put your hands in the snow. And so I'd hold her hands and I put her gloves back on, but she didn't understand it because she wanted to go back into it. She'd take her gloves off and she wanted to put, and then she complained again. It's this inability to understand cause and effect. So who does this practice? We need to comprehend, need to understand the role of cause and effect in our life. What we put out there comes back to us. And this is real fundamental to any Buddhist school, karma. Incidentally, when I was at Rumonji a few months ago, there was a special ceremony there for their 25th anniversary. And there were several Japanese priests that were invited to come. One of them I knew from training in Japan, Saito Hokan Roshi. And he doesn't speak any English and I don't speak Japanese, but I had the privilege to have a meal with him with a bunch of other Japanese that were all speaking Japanese, and I was kind of trying to understand a little bit. And one guy, one Japanese priest that I also trained with there in Shogoji, he was translating for me, and so we could have some dialogue. And Hokan Roshi said, "You know, your president doesn't understand cause and effect." Isn't that a profound thing to say? I mean, this is like he's getting it from a bird's eye view in Japan. Yeah, he doesn't understand cause and effect. Right? You guys get it, right? But that's a deep insight into the nature of reality that there, if we do an action, it has a result. It forms the world. It forms the world. Okay, who are the people who do this? Those that observe the 10 precepts. Okay, again, just to bring it back here, we're talking about how to develop faith. And the first is, well, who does this and how do you do it? All right, so who does it? Those that observe the 10 precepts. Those are the basic 10, we talk about the 16. So it's basically the 16 minus the 3 refuges and what's called the 3 pure precepts. It's those 10 in between there. All right. Those that loathe suffering and wish for enlightenment. All right. Those that develop an inspiration for enlightenment by meeting Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, serving and honoring them. Well, that's what we're doing. Every time we offer incense on the altar, we're serving the Buddha. Every time we offer food to the Buddha, a food offer, we're serving the Buddha. But don't limit Buddha to what's on that altar. Those that have great compassion for suffering, for the suffering of living beings. Don't turn away, right? Those that don't turn away from the suffering that's happening in this world, not in another world, in this world. Okay, then he says there's 3 minds to develop. This is the cultivation part. This is the discipline part. The first one he calls straightforwardness. The second one he calls profoundness. And the third one, compassion. You can see how these are all overlapping, aren't they? It's not linear. But I want to look a little bit on these three minds. And they're very loosely connected with Dogen's 3 minds that I've been talking about in the Tenzo Kyokun. You remember? Joyful mind, grandmotherly mind, and big mind. I'm going to be talking about big mind tomorrow. But here you can see it. Let's see. Let's see what page. The first is the mind characterized by straightforwardness, for it correctly meditates on the principle of suchness. So that's what we've been talking about this whole time, the principle of suchness. Right? We come from suchness, we come from thusness, the thus come one. And a way to maybe think about this, if I had a whiteboard, I would just put it up there on the board, but imagine an atom. At the nucleus, you have all the protons and the neutrons, and then on the circle, the outer part is an electron spinning around. That's the old model of the atom. But physicists know now that depending on the observer, the electron is sometimes a particle and it's sometimes a wave. It doesn't make sense. It just blows the mind. Sometimes it's a defined particle and sometimes it's undefined. It's a wave. I like to think of that as a good analogy for thusness or suchness, that we are, as we live, we are this particle. But when we practice, we can also notice that we're also the wave. We're the entirety, in other words. So there's that circumference that goes around the nucleus of an atom, right? It's going around in a circle. And it's sometimes only at one point, but it observes a rotation, it observes a path. And then sometimes it's the entirety of the path. It's the whole thing. Wow, isn't that enough to blame? That to me that's how I understand thusness or suchness. But it's something to be experienced, not intellectualized, in our zazen. And it says, do it straightforwardly. Do it straightforwardly right now. It's not something that you do somewhere else. You do it in zazen. That's what we're doing in zazen. We're entering into the ultimate dimension. We're entering into the absolute dimension when we sit zazen. Do it straightforwardly. In other words, it's not in another place. You don't have to change your mind or anything. It's just seeing. And we could even practice that, even for a moment at this time together. Just take a moment to sit and see. Sitting down, lowering the eyes, soft focus, relaxing the physical body, opening the mind, and connecting with suchness. This doesn't have to be a difficult thing. It says do it straightforward, right? In a straightforward way, right here, right now. The result is the loosening of anxiety. Where do we go? We're always right here. All right. The second is the mind of profoundness, for there is no limit to its joyful accumulation of all kinds of goodness. So to take joy in the good, that's Dogen's first mind, joyful mind. All right? To take joyful accumulation of all kinds of goodness, to be joyful, right? We want to not lose sight of that joy. Profound. A second is the mind of profoundness, to see deep into the wonder of existence. And then the third is the mind filled with great compassion, for it wishes to uproot the sufferings of all sentient beings. That mind of compassion. And we can also do that in zazen. The heart opens to suffering, and you make the wish, I wish. We can even do that now. And just placing your hand to your heart, and because this is an embodied practice, it's not intellectual. It's through the physical. It's through the fibers of our being, right? Through the muscles. To feel compassion, to feel the heart break at the suffering that we're witnessing in the world, to allow that suffering to break our hearts. And out of that suffering, we feel also a desire to do something. And that doing might initially simply be observing suchness. It might simply be observing joyfulness, the profundity of being alive. And in developing compassion, we send our loving thoughts out to those that are suffering through prayer, when we're putting our palms together, when we're bowing, when we're chanting, but also in zazen. You don't have to wait for compassion to cultivate compassion. Don't wait for cultivating compassion outside of zazen. Zazen is also a place for the cultivation of compassion, not just wisdom. Right? So that's the discipline that we are doing in Sesshin, those three things. At the beginning of the talk, I mentioned not moving, right? So there's the stopping, there is seeing, there's seeing suchness, then there is acting. And acting is referring to the development of compassion, right? And we can simply, we might feel helpless at times, but this is the time. This is the time to feel the suffering of the world, and then to act, right? And we act first for ourselves. If we can, here's the thing: we also have to receive compassion. So when the heart breaks open with the suffering of the world, we need to know how to connect with the self-compassion, with unconditional love, that grandmotherly mind, unconditional love, to feel it. And here at the, in Nebraska Zen Center, we're doing all kinds of things to be embraced by the Buddhas. Everything, I feel that when I'm wearing my robes, I feel so loved. Those of you wearing your rakusus, I encourage you to look at your rakusus when you put them on, to feel loved by all the celestial beings, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, all absolutely love you. When you're sitting in Zazen, to feel the love of Buddha emanating, just encompassing your whole being. Something that loves you beyond measure. That's the only way we're going to develop our compassion for others, is if we're able to receive it ourselves. And so really in Zazen, we're opening up to that love, opening up to that compassion, and then we're able to also offer it to others. Right? So it goes both ways. So we can do these things while we're sitting. There is also a place for shikantaza, where we just simply, okay, let go of all this stuff. We let go of all this stuff. But you might find there's times where you get anxious when you're just sitting, or there might be times when you're finding you are you've hit a wall. And that's where I really recommend some of these thoughts. So thinking about directing your attention towards suchness, directing your attention towards the suffering of other beings for the means of developing compassion. Right? These are ways to unlock our shikantaza practice, in a sense, when we're feeling stuck. And I want to invite you guys to Dokusan. I do want to do Dokusan, and we can talk about this more if you like, or talk about whatever you want to talk about with regards to Dharma. But that's what I wanted to share today. Thank you so much. Thank you for your practice. Keep it up. I'm very grateful that you are all there. I'm really, really grateful. I'm honored to be in this particular seat offering this Dharma talk. I appreciate your listening ears, and I wish you all blessings, all love, all kindness. May it all enter your hearts and minds. May your families be well. May they be happy. May they be peaceful. Thank you all.
Thank you, Daishin. Thank you.